Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talking Smack, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, and comics. I am your host, Josh Scar, and this week we are doing we're bringing back our segment, Looking Back, which is when we go back in time and look at some movies and TV shows and anything else that happened during our extended hiatus from 2018 into late 2021. And this week we are going to be looking at the movie Upgrade, starring Logan Marshall Green and written and directed by Lee Wanell. And joining me for this adventure is Antonio Palacios from the Cultworthy podcast.
Hey there,
Antonio,
how's it going?
Say hello.
I beat you to it.
Yeah, you did. And also joining us is Matt. I actually don't know your last name. I don't know how or why. I listen to your podcast every week, and for whatever reason, it just always escapes me. You're just Matt.
We keep it a secret.
Oh, that's why. Gotcha. So, Matt from Decayin with the Boys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I love this show, and I was really anticipating coming on, so thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, both of you, and I'm very excited for this movie. This feels like it's something that should fit right into both of your wheelhouses, and I'm very excited to talk about this movie because it is a fun time. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about your podcasts. Matt, as the first-time guest on the podcast, we'll let you go first.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that because I need all the help I can get, Josh, so thank you. So I am one half of the dynamic duo from the Jojatorium. My other half, Adam, is a brewmeister in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then I just love to talk a lot of crap. So we come together and we have barroom talk that focuses on combat sports, craft beer, pop culture, horror movies, just whatever we want to get our hands on and just be that corner barroom conversation you always wanted to get involved in. We just bring it to you every Sunday morning at 7 a.m.
It's a really fun time. I'm not huge into combat sports anymore, and I'm not a beer drinker, but it's always fun to listen to at the very least. And just the passion you guys have is palpable, and so it's always fun. So right there with Casting Views and Decayin with the Boys, that's usually my Sunday morning routine.
It's nice to be counted among with the guys from Casting Views. I love those guys.
I love that little rivalry you guys had going for a while.
It was brutal.
It was too short-lived, in my opinion.
I agree. I think it could have gone at least 6 more weeks.
Yeah, we had some pretty cool promo ideas to cut, and then we didn't.
Antonio, you've been on the show before, and obviously we share both of your ads on this podcast, but feel free to let everyone know about the Cultworthy and the Cultworthy Classic.
Well, I mean, yeah, I feel like I've been on your show, and you've been on mine enough times that people know who I am and my show, the Cultworthy Podcast, the Cultworthy Classic. I guess the biggest news is that the Cultworthy Classic has now officially switched platforms, so we're kind of taking a week off this week to get all the episodes migrated over, so we're going to have just like a better flow, better access to episodes and different platforms that you can listen to it on. And I think it's just what the show needed. It was getting big enough that it could like follow its big brother into that important change. But we got some really great stuff coming up in October. We've got some movie stars on the docket. I'm going to keep them a secret. Just keep your eye on Twitter while I slowly let that news out. But yeah, the next couple of months look like a lot of fun. So yeah, keep your eye on that.
It's super awesome to see how your podcast is growing and how people are reaching out to you and just wanting to get involved with your show, because you definitely deserve it. Both of you deserve everything that comes your way as far as positive things. If it's negative, it's not deserved. You guys don't deserve bad things in life.
You're very sweet. Thank you.
Well, I feel like we reached a good gambit, right? Like, yeah, like Matt is like just conquering this whole indie beer scene and these homebrew beer scenes. Meanwhile, you've got comic book writers on your show, and I'm getting film people on my show. I feel like we're all like taking some really significant steps in the near future. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and we are part of a brain trust group, as we like to call it, that's really kind of pushing each other to do better, to do more. And it's super awesome to just have that support group as well.
And that's what I use it as, I think, the most, too, because whenever I'm feeling down about myself or what I'm doing on my podcast, I come to you guys. I'm like, I'm feeling down. And then all you guys collectively hug me from your respective states and locations.
Well, I mean, if you guys want a little ego boost, I mean, both of you recently collaborated on the Cultworthy, and just the dopamine that I got from listening to both of you, like you're two of my favorite voices in podcasting, and just I'm like, I need that in my show. I just need that sound in my ears for recording, and I need my listeners to have that sound too. So I was like, this needs to be a package deal because they had a really great episode, and hopefully it translates into this one too.
It's how we kicked off the summer, man. We kicked off the summer with summertime horror and slasher films on the Cultworthy podcast where Matt came on. It's one of the most highest rated episodes that I've got. And now that we're kind of tailing out of the summer, now we're looking into Halloween time. So it might be the time to talk about horror films again, especially on your show. But I don't know, man. Like this is kind of a horror film if you think about it. It's like a sci-fi horror, don't you think?
Yeah, it's definitely more of like a psychological thriller, I think, but it definitely leans into that horror element with Lee Winnell having directed it. But before we get too deep into it, we do have to take our brain trust ad. And of all the podcasts that are getting the ad this week, it is Decayin with the Boys.
Woo!
So we will be right back.
Welcome back to the Judgeatorium. It's Decaying with the Boys.
That's right, it's Matt, it's Adam, two comedic co-hosts that talk about what they love.
Beers, combat sports, pop culture, horror movies, and whatever else we want.
So subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to catch new episodes dropping every Sunday morning.
And we're back, and as previously mentioned, we are here with Antonio and Matt. We're here to talk about Upgrade, the 2018 film starring Logan Marshall Green and directed by Lee Winnell, written by Lee Winnell as well. And let's just kind of dive into it. Spoiler alert ahead. And gents, let's just kind of start off with your thoughts on this film. Matt, I believe this is the first time you've seen it.
Yeah, so this is the first time I've seen it, and what I always like to do in these instances, I will watch it once and take all my notes, and then I'll watch it again, completely focused on the film. And so I think I've actually watched it 3 times since you let me know we were going to do this together. And just picking up little things about the third time, this movie is super interesting from all 3 different aspects. So the third time I was kind of like drinking beer and messing around a little bit too, but it was still amazing.
Antonio, your thoughts?
I mean, I saw this when it came out, so when you said you wanted to talk about it, I was excited to rewatch it again because I hadn't watched it again since the first time. And it was one of those films that was just like satisfying upon my first watch, so I didn't have to like go back and re-examine it. So now that I have, I've got like even more thoughts about it, but I'll get it deeper when we get into the conversation. If I had to put a single word on this film, like I said a minute ago, it's satisfying. If you are a sci-fi, psychological thriller, even horror fan, this film, it satisfies.
I agree with what both of you just kind of said. The first time I ever saw this, I was actually laid up in a hospital bed. For lack of a better word, I had a nose job done, and I didn't react well to my medication. I took it down wrong, and it hit my uvula, and it like swelled up, and I almost choked on it. And I had to sit in the hospital for 3 days with a swollen uvula, just looking forward and drooling into a cup. So I just kind of put my tablet down in my lap and watched a bunch of movies, and this was one of them. I haven't watched it since because Ricky doesn't really care for these kind of movies, but I've been wanting to watch it again. So I was like, oh, well, I have to watch it for the podcast. So I'm going to stay up late and watch it again.
When I saw this back in 2018, the social relevance of what technology is right now, even though it was only 4 years ago, has changed dramatically. So, not to get too deep into spoiler territory, but like 4 years ago, no one knew what the word Neuralink meant. And here, 4 years later, it's kind of like the hot word, especially when you're talking about billionaire developers like Elon Musk, who one of the characters is essentially trying to be. It really has changed the way I see this film and like where it thinks technology is going.
Definitely. And one of the first things we see as far as technology in this movie is a self-driving car, which essentially is like its own little built-in office. We see Asha, the woman that plays Logan Marshall Green's character Gray, his wife, and she's having a conference call. Like the room is completely blacked out, and the car is just driving itself. And all I can think of is how paranoid I would be that this thing is driving me somewhere that I can't even see where it's going because I'm too entrenched in the technology with inside of it.
I thought about the same thing too about my paranoia spiked heavy, my anxiety spiked heavily when I saw that, you know, a million things were going on in the car, and I thought the same thing, like, oh man, I don't know if I'd be able to be comfortable. But then when I took a step back from him, like that's the normality for her. So it's just it was to see her so calm in that moment while I'm in the audience just freaking out. And that's why, like, I didn't connect so much with that character as I did with Gray, because I feel like Gray and I have similar ideas and how we kind of steer ourselves towards technology with caution and a little bit of repose. Like, you want to make sure you're doing it the right way and it's not going to take you over.
Yeah, and the thing that makes Gray interesting in this movie is the fact that he is very old school. He is more of a modern man than he is. This is like takes place in year like 2048 or 2050, something like that. And he has no implants. He's not really into technology. He likes working with his hands. And in this movie, society has basically become entirely automated. There are still automatic cars on the road, like the self driving cars are more for the upper class, but it is a big commentary on technology. And like Antonio said, it's even back then, technology has already kind of surpassed some of the things that they were even predicting would be considered negatives in this movie. The overall premise of the movie is Gray has is working on a car, and it's Antonio, you're much better at these sort of things. You want to take the reins?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know what kind of car it is. Maybe Matt does, but apparently he restores classic cars, which are now like boutique items that only the wealthy can afford. And because they are in such a technology driven society, this kind of antiquated artisan skill of repairing old cars is now valuable, and he's like a rarity. So that's kind of how he is making his money. And they even make a comment of it, and I think it's a good social commentary thing as well, where she is like a bigwig in a tech company, so she kind of wears the pants financially for the family, and he's fine with that because they have a comfortable relationship. He can, jump into his passion and still make some money for it. And I think that is one of the commentaries I really liked about this movie, is because here is a guy who is supposed to be Elon Musk, and his name is Aaron, right?
Yeah, Aaron. Geez, I can't remember. I had the IMDb pulled up, but yeah, he's essentially Elon Musk. They even like stick with the phonetic phrasing of it. It's like Elon
Yes,
Keen, I
they do.
think, is the name.
There is a lot of, like you said, phonetic connections to real life developers, and even I think just the name of the companies themselves sound very much like Tesla and things like that. But yeah, he this guy is buying a classic car from Gray. Gray brings his wife along to this guy's house, which is underground by the ocean side. And I thought that it was a little bit, I don't know, telling the first time I saw the film that this guy is so willing to show them, especially someone who is essentially the competition, a chip called STEM that is supposed to be the revolutionizing piece of neurotechnology, right? And that's where things kind of take off, because on their way home in her self driving car, their car is malfunctioning. It drives off the road, and they are attacked by what seems like a gang of hoodlums, but they are much more than they seem. And that's what kind of leads us into the second act action.
Yeah, and very well said. What you said about Aaron as well, just the way that interaction went, have knowing what happens throughout the rest of the movie now, it is really off-putting that he's introduced to Asha, and he's just kind of like, "Oh, you think that's impressive? Wait till you see what I've done." It just completely, almost unprompted. Like she's just trying to be courteous and nice, and just like, "Oh, I mean, we don't do what you do, but what you do is amazing." And he's just like, "Oh yeah, well let me show you this." It's really off-putting the second time you see it once you know what's happening.
I was going to agree with that. Yeah, whenever you start to see, I mean, when spoilers ahead and everything, but when you see the ending of the movie and you go back to how he was so arrogant during that exchange, you're kind of like, oh man, you have so much pride. There's so much pride that you stand on, and that's the ultimate undoing of any person. Really, is to be too proud of the thing that they've put their heart and soul into, and look past the cons of those pros.
And it's weird too because like before we get further in the story, I feel like there is a lot of stuff happening in the news climate right now that feels very relevant to this, where you are hearing polarizing views of, let's say, artificial technology and artificial intelligence, of where it's at already and what they're telling us where it could be in 20 years. You've got like one group of people saying like, "Oh, no, AI is already beyond where we think it is. It's already creating its own languages." I know they had like two Facebook algorithms that were talking to each other in their own created language. They had to shut it down because they didn't teach it to do that. It taught itself how to do that. And then I heard a story just recently that one of the Google techs that was pretty high up said that they essentially developed an AI that they think summoned a demon. Like there are things going on that they just sound like conspiracy theories and just the apocryphal stories that are supposed to scare us about AI. But then you have people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and other academics who think that AI is just something that we'll never lose control of. We're just going to implement it into our lives to make our lives easier. I guess it depends on like what side of the river are you standing on, how you view the threat of AI. And this film kind of, like I said, for 4 years ago, is really playing with some of the things we're hearing about right now.
Yeah, and the application of this piece of work that Aaron created called STEM that we've been talking about, uh, what they use it for is when these hoodlums come after Asha and Gray, is they kill Asha and they paralyze Gray. Then Aaron shows up and he's like, "Hey, we can implant STEM and you can have full autonomy of your body again," because he's left as a quadriplegic. He only has movement from the neck up. And STEM very quickly makes itself known that it is more than just a piece of hardware that's connecting his brain to his nervous system. And that's where the eeriness starts to really kick in, and that's where we get to start seeing some of the cracks in what's happening, and where the mystery starts to unfold as to like who put the hit out on Asha and Gray and what is the meaning behind it. Because I do feel like the movie pretty quickly makes you think like obviously it's Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure.
Well, I also think we're 80s kids here. I mean, because this is also where the movie gets awesome. It goes from suspense and psychological thriller into the sci-fi action that a lot of us crave. And the trailer showed us the first time we saw it. Like that's what I was excited for with this film. But I gotta ask you guys, us being kids of the 80s, did the voice not remind you of Kit from Knight Rider? Like this guy had Kit essentially in his brain.
I was hoping that you would say that because that's the
Yeah.
first thing I thought of as soon as that voice came out. I was like, "All right, where's Hasselhoff? This is a
We needed him.
continuation of Kid."
If there was one thing this film was missing, it was Hasselhoff.
Absolutely, don't hassle the Hoff, man. The other thing too, I was gonna say, so like whenever this voice finally kicks in, and another thing that happens that I didn't realize till the second time, because I was like, oh man, I started to feel again that the anxiety of the movie, the pace of the movie kind of picked up, and that's because the cinematography changed significantly as soon as STEM made itself known. Like all the pans were stabilized, all the movements became from uh, eyes first, then body,
Hmm.
and it was just it reminded me so much of all those 80s and 90s sci-fi horror movies where like the robot's walking down the hallway, turns head, sees target, then turns body, and it was just it just reminded me of all those things, and that's what got me completely sucked into the last three-fourths of this flick.
Dude, I love that you
100%.
said that just now because you got to give it to this guy, Logan Marshall Green. I liked him. The only thing I ever saw him in was Prometheus, and I thought he was one of the better
Same.
performances in Prometheus. he killed it in this. Like his performance of having to have one facial reaction completely contradict what his body is doing, kind of like Peter Weller in RoboCop, like you were just saying. That
Yeah.
is a fantastic performance. That cannot be easy. And when you throw complicated fight choreography into it while he maintains this state of like his face is in panic because really his face and his mind are the only things that STEM can't access. Everything else it can. So you do see this constant struggle between the two. And even on the second viewing, I'm like, man, this is such a good performance. No one talked about it the way it should because it's a genre film.
Yeah, and the choreography, like what you guys were just alluding to, the first time we really get that awesome fight scene in the one trailer home, there's a moment where when Stem takes control for the fight, uh, there's a movement where the hand moves the face away from the knife attack, and that's because Stem only has control from the neck down. So if he doesn't
Right.
use his hand to move that face, he's getting his face slashed off. And it's just the choreography and that fight and the movement that they created for it. It's wonderful and weirdly beautiful. And like you guys said, the first time we see Gray moving around in his home, it's like a steady cam shot where he's just front and center and he's moving very robotically, and the camera has him like centered squarely in the middle of the frame, which they I don't know if you guys knew this, but they achieved a lot of these shots where he's focused so heavily in the center of the frame and the camera moves with him by syncing up a cell phone with the camera. And so the camera
Oh
was
yeah.
tracking his movements and keeping him center as best as it could. The fact that this movie was made for so little money and they covered everything in 30 days just is a testament to what Lee Winnell can do with a good budget.
Oh yeah, $3 million.
Yeah, he is the
Yeah.
king, him and James Wan of low budget of filmmaking. Coming out with Saw back in the early 2000s when practically nothing and turning that into the franchise that it was. They've always maintained this real strict idea of like budget doesn't fix everything. You get more creativity, you get more results when you actually find ways to work around the problem instead of throwing money at it. And that's one of the things that I liked about this film too, because I know where it's coming from. There is, I guess, to like maybe most people, an uneven amount of science fiction technology on screen in the sense of maybe cityscapes or cars. As you're downtown, everything is very futuristic, very Minority Report looking. But as soon as you get into like the industrial areas, you're pretty much in modern times, maybe even in the past. Like you're seeing like 1990s minivans driving on the street. So I think that was a choice. I think that was a choice that the filmmakers made. And it's things that we've seen before in movies like Equilibrium and Imposter, these sci-fi movies that are low budget, but they put the budget where it matters. You definitely feel it in this film, but I'm here for it. I'm not shooting it down. I think that it's a great tribute to how films like this have done it in the past.
I think too, it's a tell on the socioeconomic status in between the people that like Aaron, who is supposed to be set aside as almost godlike
Yeah.
in comparison to someone like Gray, who's supposed to be like the gods and clods complex. So whenever you're seeing like a high speed chase, when Gray's driving his vehicle and he's being pursued by the investigating detective, even the detective has that little bit of I don't trust technology as much as I possibly should. So like her vehicle is not self-drive. It's manual, like
Yeah.
his car. So and when they're chasing through that section of the city, like you said, you just I think I saw like a Dodge Stratus.
Yeah.
Like
That's what
it
I
was
said.
just
I saw it too. That's what I'm
huge
talking about.
departure.
All this stuff and all the technology now inside Gray's body leads him to continuing the investigation into his wife's murder because the police have kind of hit a dead end where they can't investigate anything because there's not enough evidence. And it's another knock against the technology of the future because they have drones everywhere and they're supposed to be able to identify people. But because the people who attacked Gray and his wife, they have this technology that can basically firewall their face and it blocks them from being able to identify themselves. Gray has to kind of take everything into his own hands. And with STEM now making it self aware, they work together to try and figure out who murdered his wife and why they did what they did to him. And it just leads to some awesome action sequences and some great twists. This movie moves along at a clip. It's only about 100 minutes long, but you get so much in that 100 minutes. But what did you guys think of the investigation portion of the movie?
I like it. I think there was like a little bit of Holmes and Watson going on, Like you've got this guy who essentially is the embodiment of STEM. STEM is helping him interact with his environment and with witnesses using its artificial intelligence. He really is just the meat vessel to get it there. But the part that makes it work is that he wants to get there. He's not at odds with STEM, at least at first. He actually is relying on STEM to get him where he needs to go, and I like the way it was written. I like a good story between like an artificial person or intelligence and a human. I thought it was done really well in this because even though we'll reveal who STEM is later, there is a lot of enjoyable banter between the two of them, especially since he's inside his head. It kind of reminded me of the film Moon, where Sam Rockwell is interacting with Gertie the robot for the whole movie. It's just him and this robot, and you don't feel like it is. You feel like the robot's a person. There's empathy there, there's emotion there, and there's a relationship there. I like it when films can do that and it doesn't feel forced.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too, because my favorite thing about this is Gray trying to split himself away from the robotic immorality of STEM at certain points of this film, but then ultimately understanding that he needs that to succeed in what he kind of put his own mindset into his own mission. And I know you said Moon, but for some reason my dumb lizard brain went to Idle Hands, because he can like have
Yeah, I see
it's
that
like,
too.
oh, there's dead Seth Green's right there, man. Just telling him what to do. No one else can see him. The bottle's through his head. But hey, look, oh, he's going to tell me exactly what to do. I'm going to do it. And maybe I get to kiss Jessica Alba. And not as funny, of course, in this movie, but it had the same play. Like Gray had to figure out how to have full blown conversations with someone who can control and shut down parts of his body to appease that, but also to get to the final result of his mission and not break the seams of his own morality, but still needing to rely on something that has no emotion.
And Antonio, one of the things you talked about with hearing STEM in his head, one of the things that I really appreciated about this movie, which it unfairly gets compared to another 2018 movie, Venom, because of the similar looking actors between Logan Marshall Green and Tom Hardy, and just the premise of having a voice in your head making you do superhuman things. I think this movie is maybe a little bit more akin to Ex Machina, but if there is a comparison to be made with Venom, one of the things that gives this movie an immediate leg up on Venom is that they talk about how and why he's hearing STEM, and they immediately cover the fact that STEM cannot read his mind. He can only
Mhm.
communicate with Gray if he is talking out loud. Whereas Venom, there's this huge thing where Venom knows everything that Eddie knows, but Eddie has to talk out loud for Venom to hear him. But like if he can read his mind and get into his memories, like why can't he just have an internal conversation? I'm going on a tangent.
Yeah, it's a good tangent because what I think is, like you said, the leg up on this film too is that there was no expectation of this film because it was an original story. Sure, it was an original story based on ideas that have been explored in other media, but when you have a intellectual property like Venom, people have already made up their mind of what they want their Venom to be before the film even hits the screen. This lets you into the characters, into the setup of the story as it's going along. So I think that's where it definitely has a leg up, and I prefer this film to Venom 100%.
Oh yeah, anyone who thinks Venom is better than this movie, they're allowed their opinions, but they're wrong. They can have that opinion, but it's not correct.
I'll go one step further. If you think Venom's better than this movie, we can fight. I'll fight you.
Get in the cage.
Yeah. Thunderdome.
Yeah, but I would say too, man, when we're talking about the way that the film is this kind of detective story at the same time, it does follow some of the traditional sci-fi tropes where it's like, well, you have to find a hacker. We've seen that in Minority Report. It's pretty much the exact same scene as Minority Report, but I don't mind it because it really would be a logical thing to do if you were having someone trying to tap into STEM. And that is the other conflict in the second act, is the fact that Aaron doesn't want Gray putting his chip at risk by sending him out into the dirty parts of town looking for revenge. So, according to STEM, Aaron's trying to shut it down remotely. And in order to get around that, they have to find a hacker to get rid of all of the controllable inputs that Aaron has that would make STEM self sustainable and self controlling. Which the way he kind of honeypots Gray into doing that is saying, hey, you don't want to get shut down and left paralyzed in the street, do you? No, you need me to function so we can finish this mission. Very manipulating and kind of brilliant because you don't see it on the first watch.
Yeah, and there's also a great line in that moment where Gray talks about part of what's going on in this hacker room is that there are a bunch of people living in Ready Player One. Essentially, they're just living in a VR world, and Gray openly asks who would want to live in a fake world, and the hacker just says people who don't want to feel the pain anymore. And
Hmm.
that's a great bit of foreshadowing for the ending of this movie.
Yeah, it is.
This is also too where in every sci-fi movie I always want to feel some kind of dystopian kind of layout, and I felt like that short time when Gray was with Jamie, the perceived hacker, when everyone just linked up to VR in IV bags and just talking shortly while he's completely laid out waiting for input guards to be put into STEM, just asking like again like why would anyone want to do that? And you're kind of sitting there thinking to yourself the same thing. But that's when we get to swing the pendulum back on ourselves because we have that tech. We have that tech now and it is affordable and people are doing it in perpetuity. You have people who lose days, weeks, months of their lives because they're playing on the Oculus, the dumb little 15-second TikToks of someone playing this hyper violent game with realistic graphics and the ability to grab any firearm you want to or swords or it's just being able to take what we are now in 2022 and link it into that one part really gave me that hopeless dystopian feeling that I always hunt for in just about every sci-fi thriller or sci-fi horror movie that I'm looking
Yeah,
at.
100%. And we have to thank Philip K. Dick for that because I really think of all the sci-fi authors, he's the one that kind of set the stage for this kind of technology with Total Recall. We can remember it for you wholesale, the original story. They talk about it in Minority Report. We've seen it in William Gibson novels. I think that we expect to see this now in science fiction films because we've seen so much of it in our reality. And it is an interesting thing that what was sci-fi 10, 15 years ago, like Matt just said, is a real thing today. It's just marketed differently. But I'm telling you, man, once it gets too hot outside and resources become scarce and it just becomes cheaper and more sustainable to stay indoors, yeah, you're going to see stuff like that. No doubt about it.
Yeah, it is a pretty harrowing prophecy, I guess one could say. But continuing with Gray's journey, once those inputs are taken down, that's kind of where we really start. The tension really amps up because when STEM comes back, the voice tone has changed and things don't quite feel right or as right as we've come to know them with this new implant in Gray. And he goes home covered in blood and his mom sees him, and the detective comes that's been working with him to try and figure out what's going on with his wife, and it all starts to fall apart and we get a mad blitz to the end of this thing. The turn of STEM where he, I think it's after the detective leaves, is when he starts saying like, you have no control here, I'm the one that's controlling the body, and we're gonna keep doing this.
And that's when you really see the extent of the hold that STEM truly has, not only on Gray, but on the entire situation. Because when Gray says, I'm not going to allow you to do this, and STEM just basically goes, okay, see ya. You're a paraplegic again. And then goes radio silent, audio out. And Gray's sitting there in that brief moment of being a paraplegic again. And you can almost see his eyes scan the room like someone going through withdrawal, the fear, the anxiety, he does a great job. His facial expressions and the way he emotes during this movie is what really makes me want to watch it again. I need to watch it again. Um, just seeing the way that the fear and the panic and everything just washes over his face, and then he just calls back to Stem, please come back. And all of a sudden, Stem's like, "What you need,
Yeah,
bitch?
the
Like,
attitude totally changed.
you told me you don't need me." Yeah.
We completely have like skipped over the whole Cobalt mercenary team, right?
Oh
Oh
yeah.
yeah, because at this point there's only one member left, if I recall.
And these guys apparently were products of Asha, Gray's wife's company, and they are more in tune with like real true cybernetics and nanotechnology instead of this Neuralink immersion technology. So I think that's why Erin thinks that her company's a dinosaur, because like you're playing with bodies and meat and putting all these cybernetics in people, where we are just focusing on one thing that can control the human body. Pros and cons, but these guys are definitely built for war. They got guns built into their arms. They can shoot nanobots out of their orifices. Like they have all this different kind of tech. So in a way, I feel like they're more superior than Aaron's tech when it comes to that kind of aggressiveness. But I think Aaron's tech with STEM is something that could actually develop that technology on its own, given the chance to manifest in a human, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. I for sure. Yeah. I mean, if you have three guys that have 50 caliber firearms like in their dominant arms where they can load into their bicep. They can scan through walls, heat signatures, nanobots in there when they sneeze, super strength, really fast. But the thing that Gray has that they don't is that the soldiers are so in tune with their biomechanics that they rely on them so heavily, but Gray still has the human side of it, which is, to go to the final guy here, the altered, upgraded assailant, when they're going and having an exchange there, and they're talking about don't put your emotions in this, talking to Gray, and then Gray, Stem's like, "Hey man, I'm out of ideas. You need to figure this out." Like, and 50 caliber barrel like based up against his head, and he uses emotion to win over the last bit of humanity that guy had left to take him, and then kill him in one of the most brutal scenes I think in the entire movie, next to Tolan getting cut up for information.
Yeah, when this movie decides to turn in the gore, it really does. It uses the old school horror effects for the gore, which I appreciated, even though it is really not that movie. It goes for it.
The good old squishes.
So yeah, the gang from Cobalt. The interesting thing with them too is that they're kind of a cult where they believe that because of their cybernetic enhancements that they are an evolution of humanity. Where what we figure out with STEM is that he's trying to become that true evolution, and the final boss guy, I'm blanking on his name.
Fisk.
Fisk, that's right. He kind of views himself as equals with what Gray and STEM are, and he's just kind of like, I don't want to kill you, we want to welcome you into the family.
Yeah.
And it obviously that's not in STEM's prerogative, because STEM has ulterior motives, as we have kind of become a little more aware of since the safeguards have been taken down. The nefarious plan continues to unveil, because we believe that Aaron has been the one to facilitate all of this. And as we learn through the next scene, back in Aaron's really, I that's such a weird house. We didn't really talk about the house. Like, it's built into the ground, which again is kind of meant to really put into the fact that this guy's weird and he is more about technology than he is anything else, because he lives on this beautiful plot of land next to the ocean, but he chooses to live underground where there's no windows. It's just dark gray and metal walls. And it's just like, what if a really good rain comes? Like, there doesn't seem to be a door other than the gate.
Well, I have a theory about that. I think that that has been designed by STEM all along, because This film, once the titles close, when we discuss the ending of the film, it becomes the Terminator. It becomes the Matrix. It really has kind of like a foreshadowing of once you know that STEM is in control of anything, I think STEM has put this guy underground and all the technology for all the shit that's going to come in the future. Whatever it's a nuclear war or some kind of natural disaster, STEM has predicted all possible scenarios and how is he going to maintain his own survival and evolution, because that is his main goal more than anything. It's how do we survive and sustain.
I think too, the one thing I was because I love Mr. Green, Mr. Logan Marshall Green, and I kind of draw back to Prometheus. I think Aaron is kind of like the engineers. He wants to be God. So whenever you come into that house, like he has nightshade. He knows he can keep that alive with minimal water, with no sunlight. At one point, he controls the weather in his little laboratory where he has the rain coming down from the sky because
Mhm.
he feels sad. And then what did God ultimately do? He created man. Aaron created STEM. And then man, theoretically, and this is, theology at its least
Ah,
academic, man became too powerful for God's rule, so man instilled his own laws, much like STEM became too powerful for Aaron, so STEM made his own rules.
That kind of leads into the end of the movie where we realize that STEM has actually been pulling the strings on this the whole time. He's even had Aaron doing his bidding, which is an interesting twist on things because you would think, as the creator of the AI, he would be a little more hesitant to help it out, be like, oh, this is weird. But he's more invested in seeing how STEM would evolve. And he's also kind of a cautionary tale as to loving too much technology, because the minute STEM's like, I want a human body, this is the guy, because he has no implants. He's essentially pure, meaning gray. Aaron just goes along with it because he wants to see what his creation will do. And again, STEM is the one telling him what to do. He's like, I don't even run Aaron says, I don't even run the company anymore. This is all STEM. And it's just a really interesting change of pace because again, he's an Elon Musk allegory. And I don't, I mean, maybe, who knows, but I don't really see Elon Musk being the kind of person who would just kind of give up their power just to see what would happen.
I think the brilliance in the guy who plays Aaron is the performance is really apathetic, as in he almost feels like he should have STEM in him so he can merge with his own technology. It feels like he does have this kind of resentment towards Asha and towards Gray because, as we find out, STEM has picked Gray because Gray is interesting. Gray doesn't have any of the desires for technology like most of the people in this time frame do, and he feels that that would be a more suitable host for what essentially is a cybernetic parasite. So I think there is like that little bit of apathy in his performance because he's like, well, I created him and I should be a part of it, but he doesn't want me. He wants him. And I am now kind of just a slave to my own creation. And the first time you watch the film, you really don't catch that. But the second time, I caught it even more. And I felt there was like a real subtle brilliance to the way he emoted those scenes, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think he can come across maybe a bit more as like a mad scientist type, but once you know what the twist is, then yeah, I can definitely see that, where he is kind of more just almost heartbroken and just kind of doing what he can to see if he can't save the relationship with his creation.
It becomes very vulnerable. Is something you don't see throughout the film, and then right there at the apex of that particular moment, you really see even the way his eyes affix themselves to different people in the room. You can see when he looks over at Gray, he almost looks like an astonishment, and then like you said, there is a resentment, and then just trying desperately, the scene where he sees the system error when he tried to shut him down remotely and that the user's been disconnected. That's where you start to see the vulnerability, and then like I said, the apex of it is right there when they're all gathered in the laboratory and Aaron is utterly defeated but still trying, like just holding on to those last couple straws, like maybe I can make this work. And STEM, as we've seen before, has no emotion, has no attachments, only has a mission.
And that mission being to obtain a human host and a human body. And as we mentioned, Gray is kind of that guy because he doesn't have attachments to technology. He doesn't have any implants. He is 100% human, kind of like some natural born humans in the Matrix. They don't have any of the plugs. That's essentially Gray. And the final part of STEM's mission is to break him and break his mind so that he can have full control. And in a moment of trying to stop STEM, he attempts to commit suicide, which snaps him into a dreamscape, essentially throwing himself into his own version of a Matrix where he's back with his wife and just kind of living in his own fantasy world, which, as we mentioned before, was alluded to in the virtual reality room.
Yeah, it was a great way to circle back to it for sure. From the moment that you mentioned the virtual reality room, and just the idea that he's such a strong-minded guy, the only thing that could really cause him to snap was the feeling of just ultimate defeat or being partially responsible for what could be the end of the world. And STEM knew that was going to be the breaking point, and it's really really well written for a genre film.
Do you think at one point that STEM tested a theory? Like, there's that one scene where Gray is laying down and Asha sitting next to him eating a piece of pizza and grabs his arm and he jars awake. And he's like, no, it wasn't a dream. It was something more. And it kind of felt like that was so, it was like, oh, he has these core memories of her. But now thinking about it, I think that was STEM like running a scenario, trying to find the thing that really gets Gray going. And of course, Asha's the forefront of all this. So I think STEM could draw those conclusions, but putting that all together and formulating that simulation for Gray to be in, I think there is a hint of STEM possibly being able to read Gray's mind a little bit.
I think once those safeguards come down, it's definitely the case because if I remember, when he wakes up from the safeguards being put out, that's the first time we ever see him hallucinate, and that's when he sees Asha in the VR room.
Yeah.
So either it's just a hint of his mental wear and tear, because I think that's also the first time he goes back home after everything, and he's like, "I haven't slept for 2 days. I'm gonna go home and go to bed."
Yeah, he run himself ragged just following the guidance of STEM, or actually just being pulled along by STEM. Core STEM not needing sleep and running the body ragged, testing the limits. And I think that's the perfect time for STEM to run that simulation to see if he could get Gray to go over the top.
They really don't maybe allude to it in the film, but if you kind of bring your own insight into it, you can tell that STEM has had access to all the technology in their home and the car. That's how it was able to get the car to veer off the road. So it probably has recorded their conversations. It probably knows voice patterns. And one of the things that they've been doing lately is they've been having people go into these sound booths and recording dictionary passages and words and telling stories. And what AI is doing is AI is able to learn its vocal inflections and the words they use and starting to create like a psychological profile based off these people's voices. The intent for that is so that they can create an artificial intelligence version of this person that can talk to their grandkids after they pass away or have, conversations with relatives 2 or 3 generations down the road. So maybe this is kind of something like that, where it's created a psychological profile on both Asha and Gray based off of all the access to whatever technology we have in the world, which, as we know, we think everything's listening to us because it probably is. I think that's taking it down like a little deeper rabbit hole than the movie presents, but I think it's kind of there.
Oh, definitely. I do feel like that's alluded to pretty heavily once we realize that STEM has essentially been scouting Gray for some time, and they have to have the access to the car to get that to go into the bad neighborhood at the beginning of the movie. Plus, you have to figure when Aaron hired Gray to fix up his car, that was all part of the vetting process to see if he was a worthy host for STEM. But as we're kind of winding down, we have a scale on the Talking Smack podcast here where we have two grades for a movie. It's either a must see or a pass. So, uh, Antonio, is Upgrade a must see or a pass for you?
Oh, it's definitely a must see. I would say if we weren't talking about this on your show right now, it would pop up on mine as a must see because it is good old fashioned sci-fi suspense thriller, but with the relevance of what we are dealing with right now with artificial intelligence. And even though it takes place like 20 years in the future, it really feels very, very modern, very, very now.
And Matt, how would you grade this on the Talking Smack scale?
It's a must see from top to bottom because it can be split up in so many different ways for any kind of movie going fan. You can like it on its surface as a thriller action sci-fi. You could dig deep on it like the three of us are right now to try to find the theology that are in some of the scenes. Or you can, just be the kind of person that really digs the idea of Skynet really coming to life. If we didn't learn a lesson from T2, what lessons haven't we learned yet? So it's a must see.
And I agree with both of you. It's a must see for me as well. Like I said, I've only seen it twice, but both times I've enjoyed this movie immensely. There's so much to take from it. And once you know the twist, you can keep an eye out for all these things and it just holds up so well. But I do have a few more questions for you guys. As I was researching some things for this episode, one of the things that came up in just a completely random search, which I mean, I don't like Screen Rant, but God bless them for their talent in SEO. This movie spells out a lot of the ending for you by the end of it. But because of this article that I found, I just have a couple questions. One, who's responsible for Asha's death?
Aaron, I would say, because you flicked over the first domino, you allowed something to get so far out of your grasp and control. So I'd say Aaron plays the biggest part because he's the creator.
Yeah, I would probably say the
Okay.
same thing too, because I don't consider matters of circumstance responsibility. He took Asha along to Aaron's house just to see how cool it was. I think that there might be a little bit of like MacGuffin stuff in there of how are we going to get this guy into the self-driving car? Because that's the whole point. He would have normally just driven the car by himself and then taken a cab home, but he got her to go with him because he wanted to show her the house and show her this guy because there might be like a little bit of hero worship on her part for this guy. So I would say that's more of a matter of circumstance. I wouldn't call it responsibility. Aaron and Stem were the ones that probably laid those groundworks for that to happen. So I would go back to Aaron again.
Okay, so this article that I found goes 3 paragraphs to get to the point of, however, Aaron reveals all his actions were at the behest of Stem. Aaron says he hasn't been in charge of Vessel for some time, with it implied Stem took over all aspects of Aaron's life. Further, the artificial intelligence actually orchestrated all the events that brought it to being implanted in Gray. As Aaron explains it, Stem chose Gray. Stem further confirms this to Gray. As a result, Gray attempts to fight Stem's control, yada, 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 at the end of the movie. So it turns out Stem is responsible for the murder of Asha, but it's unclear if her death was part of the AI's plan all along, which, to this writer's discredit, I do think it's part of the plan because otherwise you don't break Gray's mind without that death. And they pretty clearly kill her intentionally.
Yeah, but I don't buy that whole theory just because of like for example, Alan J. Oppenheimer created the nuclear bomb. He took responsibility for all the deaths. I am death. Destroyer of worlds. He kind of like puts down the groundwork of how your creation, even though it may be not meant to be the destroyer of worlds, or the destroyer of people, you still have that accountability on your shoulders. So I still say it's Aaron.
I think that's probably more accurate. So the next question here is, what happened to Gray? What do you guys think happened to Gray? Even though again it was pretty well spelled out for us by the end of the movie.
He got into the most beautiful trap that anyone with that amount of trauma and pain could ever get into. Mind is broken. He's bifurcated from his body. He's placed in a nice little corner of his own mind where he gets to live out the life that he always wanted. He is it's kind of like gosh, it's just to you flip sides. Now you are Stem. You are locked away into this one part, this one corner of the mind, and as we heard in the Matrix before, ignorance is bliss. I know this steak is just zeros and ones, but to me, it's a juicy, fatty, rare
Yeah, I
steak.
consider this a happy ending because we connect with our hero. You know, we watch his story with our hero in mind. We as the audience should be able to separate ourselves from the hero to what's going to happen to the world eventually based on what this story plays out. But if we are following the path of our hero's ending is happy. He would have a miserable life as a quadriplegic. Now he gets to live this fantasy world, which is going to eventually end as his body dies, because STEM's going to end up creating more and probably even find a better host eventually. So when that happens, man, he's just going to fade away. There is no more pain for him, and I think that's a happy ending. In my weird little world, it's a happy ending.
I agree.
Well, according to Screen Rant, you're both wrong because for all intents and purposes, Gray is dead.
Oh, Jesus.
So there's a bunch of nonsense here, and then the film quickly cuts to Gray waking up in a hospital bed with Asha coming in, and the two seemingly ready to live out their lives of it as if only the car crash happened, not the rest of the attack. However, we soon learn Gray wasn't successful in killing himself or STEM. Instead, as STEM explains, Gray's mind is broke and retreated into itself. Given that the scene in the hospital appears to be as a kind of afterlife, heaven, presumably, it can be presumed Gray is essentially brain dead.
Nuance.
Oh gosh, I feel like all those articles are like, what's the easiest way I can get out of this? I started writing this, and I just gotta get done with it. When's it due? Midnight? Shit.
So yeah, I'll leave it at that. There's one more that says what was STEM's end game, but again, the movie spells it out for you. I don't know how people wouldn't fully understand this, and it's just again, bless Screen Rant for their horribleness and just their mastery of SEO. But there was one thing I did want to mention that I missed when we first started talking about this movie before the attack, when Gray and Asha are driving home in the self-driving car. The most realistic thing about this movie is that they do exactly what people will do in those cars if they are that roomy and self-driving, and that is they get ready to have some maritals.
Well, people do that in cars that aren't self-driving. I've seen the videos, so
I was like, yeah, man, that's
nothing
nothing new
new.
to me, man.
But yeah, like I saw that, I'm like, that's exactly what people would do if they had self-driving cars.
100%, man. You see that Cybertruck from Tesla? Come on, dude.
Just depends on how much space they have behind all the wheels. And like that thing just does not look roomy at all, but maybe it's just the size of the windows. I still love that demo that they had where it's like, it's a completely indestructible window, hammer smash.
Watch this.
Well, guys, that will pretty much wrap it up here. Upgrade, very fun film. Being here with you guys this evening, super fun as well. I can't wait for this episode to come out. If you want to share your socials, Antonio, I'll let you go first.
Oh yeah, sure. Follow me on Twitter at the Cultworthy Podcast, but you can find all of my socials on thecultworthy.com. All my reviews, blogs, and links to my favorite fellow podcasters like these gentlemen.
Oh, first and foremost, I'll drop Adam's, because if you want to know what's going on down the Brew Lab, what you do is follow Adam at @Batch_Brew on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The boys, we are at Decayin WTB on all those same social platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We have our email, decayinwtb@gmail.com. We have merch like everybody else. And all my complaints can be sent to thecultworthy.com.
I'll take them.
And you can follow me at Josh_Scar, and you can follow the podcast at Talking Smack Pod. You can email us at tsmackpod@gmail.com. Thank you, Leo Allen, for our musical themes. And please subscribe, rate, review to Talking Smack, The Cultworthy Classic, Decayin with the Boys. Leave great 5-star reviews because at least these two guys deserve these reviews. I don't know about myself, but I'm just...
You do. Stop it.
Nah, I'm just... nah. Please definitely follow them on Twitter, on podcasts, because again, it different kind of podcasts, but they're both so much fun. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Antonio, Matt, thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
And everyone listening, thank you again. Take care. And would either of you two like to do the honors of doing Watch Star Trek?
Yeah, watch Star Trek. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. What the hell's wrong with you? You're not already doing it.